Second Tuesday Lunch and Learn, and thank you as always to our marvelous friends who sponsor this program. Before we get started, I just want to remind you of a couple of library closings. We will be closed Sunday and Monday coming up for the President's Day holiday. And then next month in March, we will not be having Lunch and Learn because that Monday and Tuesday, the 9th and 10th, we are going to be closed while they install and we all get trained on our new computer system, and it's going to be very exciting, and we're all going to be running around going, ah! But it'll help us do a whole lot of stuff that we can't do right now. So, and then Lunch and Learn will resume in April as always. And so let's get started, and I would love to introduce Chelsie Harper, who is possibly the nicest human being I have ever met in my life. And she is also a licensed therapist and social worker. And she's going to be talking to us about body positivity and self-love.
Hi everyone. How's everyone doing today?
Good.
Good. So I have a line, and I was just saying this to Leslie earlier, that it doesn't matter if we have 20 people or if we have 2 people, I'm just going to keep the energy level the same, no matter what. So thank you for that introduction, Leslie. My name is Chelsie Harper. I am, like she said, I'm a clinical therapist. I'm also a social worker. That's what the LCSW stands for. And I am really excited to talk to you about one of my biggest passions is body positivity. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, but when we have a group this small, I also really like it to feel like a discussion rather than just a presentation. So if any questions come up through this presentation, just feel free to raise your hand and I'll be happy to answer. So to kind of get started, who in here has ever heard the term body positivity before today? Okay, I see 2-3 people. It's kind of been on the radar, but it's still not widely known. It's something that you hear almost as a buzzword, but it is a lot more complex than, looking good in a bikini or flashing Instagram photos. It's a lot more in depth than that. And we're going to talk about the complexities and also some ways that you can start practicing body positivity in your own life. Because one of the things that I really like to do as a therapist, as a person, when I'm doing a presentation, I don't just want to tell you how great body positivity is. I want to give you some tools to leave with when you get out of here, right? So it's great. It's like, well, body positivity is wonderful, but now what? So I want you to leave here feeling like you have a tool, an idea, an insight that you didn't have when you came in this room. So to get started, let me grab my fancy clicker here. What is body positivity? So in a nutshell, it is the belief that all bodies are good bodies. All bodies are good bodies. Now that seems really simple, but in the real world, we don't really feel that way, do we, in our actions when we look at society? A lot of bodies are ostracized. A lot of bodies are politicized. There's a lot of discrimination based on bodies, right? Bodies are complex, and anytime we start talking about bodies, we inevitably talk about trauma. I don't think that the two can be separated, because our bodies are how we move through the world, right? It's really the core of what people see when they look at us. So body positivity is complex, but ultimately it's about developing positive core beliefs about our body, understanding our own personal biases, and yes, every person in here has biases. We're going to talk about that. And also challenging the ideas that the beauty industry and specifically diet culture have groomed us to believe. Now, here's something interesting. I cannot remember, and I want to show of hands if you've had the same experience. I guess I'll pose this as a question first. How many of you, and it looks like we have all women in this group, not surprising actually, but men are a part of this dialogue. It's not just about women, it is about men as well. But how many of you ladies have ever went out to dinner and there hasn't been some conversation around guilt and shame around food in your body? For example, the bread comes out on the table. Oh, I shouldn't be eating this bread. How many people in here have said that? Okay. Oh man, oh, gosh, that dessert looks so good. I'm really gonna have to sweat it out at the gym tomorrow. How many of you have heard that phrase or have said it? No shame, it's okay. Me too, me too. We're not singling anybody out. But ultimately, what was interesting is I couldn't remember the last time I had dinner with a group of women, especially, and not just women, but men too, where one of those phrases was not said at the table. Can any of you remember a time where you went out to dinner and that some type of dialogue around that was not used? Okay, we have one.
I don't believe in that.
Good.
Go out there and eat dinner, go out to dinner and enjoy it.
You're a person I'd want to have dinner with. But you're the only person in this room that raised their hand. Isn't that interesting, right? That we have so much internalized feelings about food, our body, and how we are perceived based on these things. So we're going to challenge that a little bit today. So where did body positivity come from? So that word, the term body positivity, was starting to be used around probably early to mid 90s. Wasn't very well known, but a group of social workers, shout out social workers, a group of social workers started an organization called the Body Positive. And that started in the 90s. It has since grown. It has its roots in feminism, right? This was ultimately started by women, this phrase, this organization, and it gained popularity and notoriety in 2015 due to an increase in surge in social media. And that includes representation. What do you notice about the women on the screen?
They're all smiling.
They're smiling, they look happy. I don't know, the runway model looks pretty fierce. What else do you notice about these women? There we go, now we can see color. What do we notice about these women? Any similarities?
They're real people.
They're real people. What makes them real people?
They aren't sticks.
They're not sticks.
It's
Okay.
okay if they're naturally that way, but,
Yeah.
starving yourself to be a stick is ridiculous.
Right, well, we see a variety of colors. We see a variety of shapes and sizes, different fashion choices. We see women who have different careers. We have musicians, models, actresses. If you're not familiar with the two ladies in the center, that's Adie Bryant, and I wish I could remember her name. She is the co-star. That's a great new show on Hulu called Shrill. It is a comedy series, but it is a comedy series that centers around body positivity and especially fat phobia and fat positivity. So we're going to talk about that. But ultimately, around 2015, we saw a surge of Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and Snapchat really having an increased representation of diversity in terms of body, color, and ability popping up. Now, this is why this is important, because representation is really important. And we're going to talk about that, but there is something to be said for seeing people who look like you in larger media contexts, right? How does it feel when you're watching a movie or you're watching an artist and they look like you? Why is that something that's important, and why is that liberating to see that? Yeah, yeah. Like you feel like you kind of fit in more? Sure. What else?
They're feel judged.
You don't feel judged, right? We become normalized when we see ourselves in larger media representations. And now with the emergence of social media, it is not only Hollywood that gets to dictate what people look at, right? What people can look at all kinds of things. People at home are now able to create content and art and media with representations that we've never seen before. And now we have that. So then came this boom of body positivity because I believe in good part because of social media. So when we're talking about body positivity, we can't have this conversation without there being intersections. And that includes really challenging our own biases when it comes to ageism, racism, LGBTQA+, which for those of you who may not know what that means, that's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender questioning, asexual, and any other term, right, that you identify as. Sexism, ableism, classism, fat phobia, and fear around spirituality. Because people express their spirituality oftentimes based on their appearance, right? So it's impossible to have this conversation without really delving a little bit deeper into our own identifications with these and also our own biases. So fat phobia, who's heard this word before? Leslie, okay, couple hands. Fat phobia is the phobia of being fat, the fear of being fat, or the fear or ostracizing of fat people. And yes, there is such a thing as internalized fat phobia. I personally identify as a fat woman, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, but it is very possible to be fat and to also be fat phobic because of diet culture programming. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But I personally believe that fat phobia is the most insidious form of discrimination and cultural shame. So I like this little picture here. Fat phobia is the reason diet culture exists, right? Is it the chicken or is it the egg, right? Which came first? Probably the fat phobia. So reclaiming the word fat. So has anybody ever been shopping with somebody that you care about, you're having fun, and you're trying on a shirt and you're looking in the mirror and you turn to your friend and you say, oh gosh, I look so fat in this. And your friend says, no you don't. Right? Has anyone ever experienced that? Okay, well here is where we're reclaiming this word. Fat is a descriptor. It's a neutral descriptor. Just like we would say tall, thin, short. If somebody calls you short, is that an insult?
But our kids do, yeah.
If someone calls you tall, is that an insult? Usually not, right? But what is it about the word fat? Why is that such a sharp-cutting word?
Sort of culturally unacceptable to look sometimes.
Culturally unacceptable. Let's dig in a little bit
Possibly.
deeper. Yeah. Why is that? Why would people say that? Does it cut so deep? Any ideas?
Well, first of all, it's presented as a choice and a bad choice at that.
Correct. We see it as a personal choice, right? So oftentimes the word fat has begun to mean lazy, unattractive, unworthy, or unhealthy, right? And we are reclaiming that word to kind of turn it back to its original identity, which is a neutral descriptor. So I have a friend, I'll share with you kind of an interesting story. I have a friend who is in the Peace Corps, and she went to Botswana in the Peace Corps. She spent a year there. And one of the things that she was really shocked by is when she got there, people would say, hi, how are you? It's so nice to meet you. Wow, you're very fat. like, whoa, right? She wasn't sure how to take that. Until it was explained to her that in that culture, it is not seen as an insult. It is seen merely as a descriptor, right? It didn't mean that she was seen as lazy, unattractive, unworthy. It was merely a descriptor. And so she said that by the end of her stay there, she had become so comfortable with that term because it wasn't a loaded word anymore. And it was interesting to hear that story. But this is something I get a lot. Well, body positivity is great and all, but what about those people on my 600-pound life who can't get out of bed? How many of you have ever seen the show, heard people say that, right? What do you see when you see this woman on this picture?
I see sadness.
Sadness. Yeah. Sadness.
Hopelessness.
Hopelessness. Right? This is something that when people hear the word fat, or when we talk about fat acceptance, this is typically the comeback that you'll hear a lot is, how can you say that, Chelsie, how can you say that this is healthy? Well, it's all in how you interpret health, right? And I am proposing a different view of health that might give this a little bit more of a perspective. So what about health? I use a term in my practice with my clients called optimal wellness. And this is the wellness wheel. And if you notice, there's several different categories on this wheel. It includes spiritual, emotional health, goals and aspirations, physical, social, environmental, and financial. Now let's go back to that picture. Do you think that that woman is struggling in multiple areas on that wheel, or just one? What do you think? Is weight the only area of that wheel that she's struggling with?
Probably not.
Probably not, right? And what's interesting about that show, and I have watched that show, is I have not seen an episode of that show where there is not significant trauma with those patients, right? And I really don't like that show for a couple of reasons, one of which is exploitative, right? One thing that you'll notice about that show is every single person who elects to do the show, they have to get in the shower, right, with no clothes. And I don't know if you've noticed that, but every single person, I think that that's probably one of the guidelines of being on the show is you have to take a shower, because that's something that you see every single episode. And so they want you to see the fat, right? They want you to see that. And it's exploitative, number one. And it also only focuses on the weight, right? There's more going on there. It's not just about the weight. If I was meeting this person clinically for the first time, yes, her health would be a concern, right? But let's talk about what trauma has this woman experienced. What is her financial health? What are her goals, right? What is her support system like? What are her family dynamics like? Right? There's more to the picture than just her weight, right? So that is something to keep in mind when we start talking about health is wellness is all encompassing. It's not just about the weight. Weight is not the only marker of health, right? Is it a marker? Sure, right? I'm not going to deny science, right? Yes, like medical science is accurate on lots of things, but weight is not the only marker of health. Another thing that's interesting is in my research, the BMI system is actually not an accurate measure of body size and health either. We're going to talk about that. Also, like we talked about with the wellness wheel, health and wellness is multifaceted. It includes a variety of different categories. And also understanding that by not shifting our model to a fuller view of wellness, fat persons are less likely to seek medical treatment because of shame and fear, right? And we're going to talk about that too. So, how many people, has anyone ever experienced this? I will be the guinea pig and say I have. We just care about your health. How many people have you ever heard someone say that to a loved one? Have you ever been told that yourself? Like, hey, I'm just concerned about your health. Here's the thing, is that shame never works, right? Shame is never the key to change. In fact, they've actually done studies, and there's a great TED Talk on this, which I'll give you the information for later, where they actually do some brain research. They do imaging scans, and they can see that when a person experiences shame, the growth and learning centers of the brain literally shut down. So what that tells us is that when a person experiences significant shame, they are not able to learn and to change and grow. Guess what part of the brain lights up when we do experience shame? The survival part of our brain. The same part of our brain that lights up when we're feeling anxious, when we're scared, and when we want to run. Right? Typically, when we feel a lot of fear, we have one of three responses. We fly, we fight, or we freeze. And do any one of those three responses equal change or improvement? No, it doesn't. So, shaming a loved one under the guise of health concern is usually just a way to make them feel bad about themselves, right? That's the only thing it's going to accomplish. Shame is never the key to change. And I really like this little picture, this illustration that says, fat phobic tears, extra salty, contains denial and faux health concerns. I thought it was cute. So the Biggest Loser. How many of you have seen this show? Only one person? Okay. It was a really popular show. And in this show, if you've never seen it, a group of people come onto this ranch and they work out like a crazy amount of hours a day, and they have, nutritionists, and they cut their calories down. It's a weight loss competition, and the winner receives a large amount of money. And they actually did a study on, I can't remember exactly what season, but they looked at one of the previous season contestants, and they looked at them, and all but one person who had been on the show and lost a lot of weight kept the weight off, which that's a typo. All but one contestant were able, right? So only one out of the 12 were able to keep the weight off. And so they studied it, and they said, hey, what's going on here? So the study actually showed that such rapid weight loss can have damaging effects on your metabolism. What happened was they talked to the female contestant who had actually sustained the weight loss, and she had said that she was having to cut her calories down to about 800 calories a day to keep the weight off because she had damaged her metabolism. So here's the thing, is that abuse? Right? So if you've ever seen the show, they take these people and they make them do all these insane workouts, and they shame them for eating, and it's very much like a competitive spirit to the show. But I personally feel like that's abusive, right? When you're forcing people and encouraging people to lose weight in ways that are unhealthy for their body, that is not good. But yet, when we see the weight loss, what happens when they get to the end of the show? And the finale comes and everybody's happy and they're like showcasing everybody. What do we see at the end of that? Everybody's happy. Wow, you did it, that's amazing. Well, fast forward 3 years and they've gained all the weight back and their metabolism is damaged. What then, right? Weight cannot be the only marker of health. And another thing that's interesting about the show, as a side note, is Bob Harper is, I believe, one of the hosts, and he's also one of the trainers. He's kind of been like, seen as like a fitness guru. Well, he had a heart attack in his late 30s, right? And it was due to a lipoprotein imbalance, right? That was damaging his heart. So we look at that, and so we look at him, and he's the one telling all of these people that they're so unhealthy, but what is the actual measure of health? Have we ever really thought about that? What is the measure of health? If you're working out every day, and you're doing this diet, and you're doing The Biggest Loser and all of these things, but you have a heart attack before you're 40, is that health? It raises a big question, doesn't it? What constitutes health? What does that look like? And so, thinking about that, it gives us kind of a larger perspective to start thinking about weight loss, to start thinking about bodies. I liked this little, picture because it shows the before picture. And usually on those before pictures, everybody looks really depressed, right? Like you see those like infomercials at 2 a.m. and it's for like some like yoga Pilates workout system or something. And it always shows like the before picture and it's like the most unflattering picture and they look super depressed and unhappy. And then the after photo, they've had like a makeup and hairstylist come in and they look super cute. And what happens when your before and after looks like this? Right? Before, happy, glorious. After, happy, empowered, right? Why does it have to be either or, right? What would happen if we were able to really love ourselves no matter where we were, right? In our body's fluctuations, in our weight, in our health, what would happen if we were able to do this? And that's the question that I'm posing to you all to think about, right? That some of the things that we've been taught, there are other perspectives and ways to look at them that don't include shame, right? So the BMI, I wanted to tell you about this because I thought it was interesting. The BMI, does anybody know what that is? BMI.
Body mass index.
Body mass index. How many in here like hearing their BMI score? Nobody, right? The BMI. So the BMI has quite an interesting history. The BMI was introduced in the early 19th century, and that's early 1800s. That was like 200 years ago, right? So it was actually introduced in the 1800s by a Belgian scientist named Lambert Adolphe Jacques Quetelet. That was his name. He was a mathematician, not a physician. He produced the formula to give a quick and easy way to measure the degree of obesity in the general population. It was meant as a tool to help allocate government resources. It was never meant to measure individual health. That was never the purpose of that equation. So one of the things that it's been criticized for is it makes no allowance for the relative proportions of bone, muscle, and fat in the body, but bone is denser than muscle and twice as dense as fat, so a person with strong bones and good muscle tone and low fat will have a high BMI. It's interesting. So something to think about is why the BMI is a bunch of BS. It's a moving target, right? Which means that if you gain muscle, right, does that necessarily mean that you have not improved your health or your strength based on your BMI? Is it a great measure, right? Number two is it was meant for large populations, not individuals. It implies weight equals health. It dehumanizes fat people, doesn't account for age, gender, and racial differences, doesn't account for body composition. The formula was created by white males, which, let's just be honest, they're not thinking about women, right? They're not thinking about differences in hormones. They're not thinking about the complexities of the human body. It's very narrow in its focus. It was developed by a scientist or a statistician, and it can lead to doctors being more dismissive of obese people. And speaking of that, medical bias. So I really loved this illustration. I thought it was really cool. It's a patient saying, "Doctor, I'm impaled." And he says, "Well, maybe you'll feel better if you lose some weight." Okay. So let's think about this. I mean, this is kind of comical, but there is some truth to this in that clients termed as obese are often overlooked and received inadequate care. They've actually done studies that show that physicians are less likely to test for certain things based on whether a patient is obese or not, based on the BMI. Many fat patients avoid appointments for fear of being fat shamed. I have an interesting personal experience with this. When I was an intern in grad school, I was interning at a primary care clinic, and I was the social worker, so I helped clients find resources. That was my job, right? That was my role. So when a client had transportation problems and they couldn't make it to their appointment, who would they send them to? They'd send them to me. When a person needed food resources, right, or they needed different help with Medicaid or Medicare, filling out the applications, doing things like that, they sent them to me. So what was interesting is they had a really high rate of patients no-showing who were diabetics. And they had asked me, they're like, "Listen, this patient really needs to be seen. They really need to come in for their follow-up. Can you please call them and figure out if there are any issues with transportation?" So I called them and I said, "Hey, this is Chelsie calling from the clinic. Saw you no-showed to your last appointments. Doctor really wants to see you. What's going on?" "I'm not going back to see that SOB." That's what they said. And I said, "Oh," and that wasn't what I was expecting. And I said, "Oh, well, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, what happened?" "Well, I'm not going to go to that doctor if they're just going to tell me I'm fat and lazy." And I heard that from more than one patient. And I said, "Okay, well, can you tell me more about what happened?" And they basically, in a nutshell, told me that they weren't coming back because what I heard them say is that they didn't feel like they had dignity, and they felt like they were being minimized when they left that appointment. And so that leads to what we're talking about here, that this is more than just feeling good in your body, right? This extends into a lot of other arenas, such as quality care, right? That leads to questions like, can we be providing adequate care for patients if we're not respecting them as individuals and we're attacking them for their choices, right? What good is it going to do if they don't come back in the room, right? Even if you feel like as a medical professional they need to lose weight, if you approach it in that way, you're going to lose them. And then what? So I had to have a little interesting conversation with some of the doctors. And what's interesting about this clinic is that most of the doctors at this clinic were residents, which means that they were learning, right? They're fresh out of med school. They were learning. They were doing their training to become attending physicians. And a lot of things that came up while we were talking about this was, well, why should I have to candy coat or sugar coat what they need to do? And it's like, we're not telling you to candy coat this, but you have to respect your patients, or else they're not going to come back, right? So then it's kind of a hard moment, and that's kind of where, as a person, and as you have to dig deep and say, okay, maybe there are some biases here. Maybe there are some things that I have to look at internally with my own perspective that challenges some things in some ways that I've been thinking. So one thing that we noticed too were higher rates of misdiagnosis and poor treatment outcomes due to untimely administration of treatment. So basically what that boils down to is we're taking too long to do the tests, so we're waiting too long to administer the treatment, therefore poor treatment outcomes. Also, this is another thing, a lot of times, a lot of medical facilities don't have the correct measurement tools to accommodate larger bodies, right? Like, for example, blood pressure cuffs or MRI machines. And also, medical schools require very little education for doctors on nutrition, right? So one thing that I think doctors, I think it's a crazy amount. I think it's like 100 hours of nutrition counseling. That's really not a lot, right? It's very, very little. And so therefore, oftentimes there's a lot of limited resources that we can give to patients because there's not a lot of focus on nutrition. So there is a really great health agency. It's called HAES, or Health at Every Size. That is the name of this organization. And they focus on a couple things. One is weight inclusivity, health enhancement, respectful care, eating for well-being, notice not for weight loss, well-being, and life-enhancing movement. And the focus is inclusion, right? Inclusion is ethical care. So there's a couple of things that Health at Every Size promotes. Number one is intuitive eating, which means eating foods and becoming more aware of what feels good for your body and what doesn't feel good. Getting more in tune with your body sensors, when things are a go and when things are, when you need to stop. Joyful movement, which, let me just say, when you hear the word exercise, does that make you excited? Okay, I'm not hearing a lot of enthusiasm. But what do you think of when you think of joyful movement?
Dancing.
Dancing. Sounds like fun. What else do you think of? Walking. Yeah. Especially in nature. Right? What else comes to mind? Joyful movement.
Swimming.
Swimming. Yeah. Joyful movement, it takes the body oppression out of it, right? You don't have to look cute at the gym. It's not about killing yourself or punishing yourself for food choices. It's about feeling joy in your body. Do we see that shift? I don't know about you, but if somebody called you up today and said, hey, let's go exercise, how many of you would be game for that? Maybe a few.
Well, I actually like to exercise more, probably if I have somebody to walk with.
Yeah.
It's more fun.
But what if somebody said, hey, come take a joyful stroll with me? It's more inviting, right? So changing the shift from exercise to joyful movement, moving your body in ways that are joyful and liberating and feel good for your body. Stress management. We know that weight gain can happen based on increased cortisol levels. Finding ways to manage your stress. And then lastly, quality sleep. As a therapist, when I am meeting with clients for the first time, I always ask questions about sleep because typically when you're not sleeping, it affects everything, right? It doesn't affect just your energy level. It affects your mood, it affects your body's physical ability to repair itself, your immune system. Go back to basics. Quality sleep is so important. And so when we're talking about health and wellness, these are the things that Health at Every Size really tries to look at as the full perspective. And joyful movement, I really love this photo. I don't think I shared this with you, but I love yoga. And I came to yoga about a year ago, and I've been going pretty regularly since being introduced. And one of the things I love about yoga is it's truly about meeting your body where it is right now. Not where you want it to be, but where it is right now. And it's interesting that this is a woman that owns her own yoga studio. And it's interesting, would you ever think that you could do that with a body? Right? Would you ever look at her body and think that she could do that? Probably not. Right? So movement and having strength and having flexibility, that is something that you can achieve no matter what your body type, right? So breaking through some barriers that have been there for so long around movement and exercise and fitness. And so I really love this photo, and I love that she just looks so happy while she's doing it. So body positivity is not only about weight. We talk about weight because it's the most prevalent, but there are also other things that come into play when we talk about intersectionality that are important when we're talking about body positivity. And one of those things is people with different abilities, right? So that can include, as we age, losing certain physical abilities, right? Like if you need a walker, or if you need a wheelchair, or a cane or other type of walking aids, to people who have had things amputated, right? Or maybe they're paralyzed for different reasons. So one of the things that body positivity advocates really advocate for is a culture of accessibility versus disability. Now, one of the things that I thought was really interesting is being really aware of language. Language really matters. And so, for example, when you roll up and you see the disability parking spots, how many of you usually say disability parking spots? Yeah, usually. No. We like to use the term accessibility parking, right? Moving toward from disability to accessibility. And this also includes accommodations. So let me ask you this question. If I get up in the morning and I've broken my arm, and I just cannot get my shirt on, right? Am I unable to put my shirt on? Okay, maybe in that moment, but what if I have a tool that helps me put my shirt on? Am I still able to do it at that point? Yeah. That is no different than somebody who is walking through the world with some type of difficulty, right? And that it doesn't matter if it involves different seating, right? Accessibility, getting into buildings. If you are able with an accommodation to use that space, you are able, right? So getting away from the word disability and being an ally by advocating for accessibility in spaces, and also stop desexualizing and categorizing people with disabilities as other, right? How many of you have ever seen a movie where there is a person with an amputated limb in a sex scene? Has anybody ever seen that? Why not? Let's talk about that. There's really limited representation, right? So a lot of times bodies that are marginalized, that can be fat bodies or bodies that are deemed disabled, we oftentimes desexualize those bodies. And the reality is people are still having sex in all types of bodies, but they're not represented, right? How often do we ever see a Hollywood movie where there's a person that isn't a typical Hollywood casting in those roles? It's rare, right? Or if they do show it, it's kind of exploitative and kind of gross, right? Or it makes us feel uncomfortable. So that's where I think understanding that it's about getting away from treating any type of body as an other, right? All bodies are good bodies. Next is ageism. So, say no to ageism. Does anybody in here know what ageism is? Yeah? Okay, has anybody in here ever experienced ageism? Okay, in what way? Does anybody care to share a personal experience with ageism? That's okay. I'm not going. We're not forcing any vulnerability today.
So like they're looking for a job.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Sure. And that's something that I specifically included on here is discrimination in employment is real. right, for people who are over the age of 55. I have spoke with lots of clients in my practice and also just friendships, right, because I have quite a diverse group of friends, and it can be extremely disheartening and disempowering when it's hard to find work, right, at an older age. But why do people do that? Let's talk about that. What stereotypes are there? Yes, Leslie.
People are always shocked if you are over a certain age and you tell or even laugh at a dirty joke. It's like,
I guess I've never seen the Golden Girls. Yeah, so it's kind of this shock and awe when an older person has a sense of humor, right? Or when an older person is sexual, right? How is that often perceived? If an older woman or an older man talks about sex, right? How is that perceived?
dirty old man.
Yeah.
Gross.
Gross, TMI. But the reality is, though, is that our bodies don't really have a shelf life, right? And that goes back to, bodies with different abilities, right? Bodies with different abilities, fat bodies, aging bodies, the human experience doesn't change, but for some reason the representation does. And so that's where sometimes when we're talking about representation, it is important because when it's not represented, we often perceive that as it not being normal or not being acceptable or welcomed. And that is something that the body positivity movement is challenging, right? So another thing too that I thought was interesting is, and I actually pulled this from the World Health Organization. Research suggests that ageism may now be even more pervasive than sexism and racism. What do you think about that?
Everybody ends up,
Yeah,
if they're lucky.
if they're lucky, it's a privilege, right? But another reason for that is because we are seeing a huge boom in numbers, right? They are deeming this the silver tsunami, right? The baby boomers are aging. Most baby boomers at this point are over the age of 65, or a large percentage. So we are getting to a place where there are more older people than younger people, right? And so what is this going to mean for how we view aging and how we view bodies? What do you guys think? What are we hoping to see change? Maybe that's a better question.
Well, if the older people have the money, they'll get represented and be shown positively.
Yeah,
Because advertisers are not stupid.
that is true. Money talks, right? In terms of advertisement. So, that might be something as the aging population does continue to increase, perhaps representation will increase as well.
It'll probably just be a young person with a wig.
A young or the dreaded aging makeup, right? Yeah. How many of you have seen the show This Is Us? Really popular show on NBC, right? It's like a really big hit show. I do like the show. But one thing that kind of irks me just a little bit about that show is the very first scene of the show, and if you're not familiar with it, there's 3 siblings, and it kind of shows their life kind of like in the past and then the present and the future, and it kind of works with timeline a little bit. But the very first episode of the show, there is a very beautiful fat woman. Her name's Chrissy Metz. You might have seen her in other things as well. But they show her getting up on a scale, and she's, you can tell she's naked, and she just looks really sad and depressed, And then fast forward, they show the mom, played by Mandy Moore, and she's young, right? But then they give her this aging makeup. And I'm like, they could have found another actress to play her at an older age, but they chose to put this obvious fake aging makeup on her, right? And I just kind of thought to myself, like, is this really great representation, right? Now, I will say that we've done better. We do have some representation. I think the earliest that really showed women living their life, having sex, relationships, was Golden Girls, right? How many of you love Golden Girls? It's hard not to love that, right? And then we still have Betty White. She's 98. She has a career. And she was she really has kind of made a career on what you were saying, Leslie, kind of that shock and awe, right? That she is still 98 telling dirty jokes, right? She kind of breaks those stereotypes. And of course we have Michael Douglas, and if you don't know who this is an 80-year-old runway model from China.
Mhm.
So doesn't that break some stereotypes about what aging means? When we see aging adults who are still vibrant and active and have very full lives and relationships, and they're happy.
Wasn't Estelle Getty about the same age as the other three?
She was.
Portraying her mother?
She was actually younger than B. Arthur, right? But they put a bunch of aging makeup on her. So that could be criticized a little bit, even though she's fabulous as an actress, right? So I think that there is more and more media representation, but what would you like to be seeing more of? Let's talk about that. When it comes to aging, what would you like to be seeing more representation of?
Somebody smart.
Okay, somebody smart.
And technologically competent.
Yes, an older person that can use an iPhone. There's lots of older people that use iPhones and are good at them, right? Yeah, and there's also lots of older people who can hear. That's another thing too. We oftentimes see older adults as frail, they can't hear, they're not able to drive. Are those stereotypes accurate? Oh, right, there's lots of older adults doing those things and doing them really well. So any other questions about this before we move on to the next slide? Okay. So LGBTQ, body positivity extends to queer, trans, femme, and non-binary bodies, right? Inclusivity is really one of the hallmarks of this movement. And so we can't be all for loving our bodies and being so open and accepting if we're not being inclusive to all people, and that includes trans. And I could do a completely different talk that would take over an hour probably on body positivity in trans adults, right? That is something that is kind of a whole other, there's a plethora of things that go into that, but ultimately respecting people's choices for their bodies and understanding that people have the right to do what feels good for their body. So any questions about this? Okay. And I just love that picture because it's glitter and it's purple and it just looks really cute. So the Body Positive. So this is an organization, the one I told you about, that was started by social workers. So body positivity, how can we now apply it? You've learned about what it entails. You've gotten a little taste of what it is. Now how can we actually apply it? So the Body Positive has 5 different competencies that they teach. Number 1 is reclaiming health, practicing intuitive self-care, cultivating self-love, declaring your own authentic beauty, and building community. So where can I start? Where can I start? So I always like to give very small, doable tools. And one way to, if you're dealing with body shame, or if this is something that you're actively working on, practicing looking in the mirror and focusing only on one thing that you love. Maybe it's your eyes. How many of you have ever looked in the mirror and only just looked at what you didn't like? Or avoided mirrors, even? Yeah. I have a client that I worked with in the past who was really dealing with some really deep-rooted self-shame and body shame. And when I had suggested this particular exercise, her response was, I don't do mirrors. I don't do mirrors. And we agreed on a pocket mirror, just a compact pocket mirror. And that's where we started. So really making it intentional to look in the mirror and only focus on one thing that you love. It could be your eyes, it could be your smile, your hair, one thing that you love. And if you can't do that, then look in the mirror and say something nice to yourself, even if you don't mean it. It's planting seeds, and that's a practice. That seed will grow. So next is acknowledging your strengths. Every woman in this room has strengths, right? You have ideas and experiences and beliefs and thoughts and so many good qualities that each one of you are carrying around. Your body is just a vessel for that. That's all it is, right? Your body is the thing that's carrying you through this world, right? So acknowledge your strengths, focusing on what we have versus what we don't have. Next is surround yourself with people who actually make you feel good about yourself, right? That might not be Aunt so-and-so who comments on your weight every time you go to the family get-together. She might not be in your posse, and that's okay, right? So surrounding yourself with people who actually encourage you and make you feel good about yourself. Next is try getting out of your comfort zone with colors and clothing. A lot of times people who are self-conscious about their body or who have a negative body image try to cover and try to hide. And I personally think that that can be a step toward liberation, is actually choosing colors and different designs that you wouldn't normally choose, right? Because you like the color, not because of how it looks. So getting out of your comfort zone, experimenting a little bit can be a form of liberation. Also, the language that we use matters. Be kind to yourself. If you were a person who wasn't in your head, would you want to be friends with your head? Have you ever used words with other people that you've used with yourself? Probably not. Most of us can be really harsh to ourselves and we don't even really notice it. So really being more conscientious and aware of the language that you're using really does matter, right? Those are seeds that you're planting and you're watering, whether they're negative or positive. And then lastly, find a community. There are lots of people who are dealing with the same stuff that you are. And one of those things is Body Positivity Club. Yes, I had to put a plug in for this. Locally, we actually started a Body Positivity Club. We meet every third Friday of the month. The location varies based on weather, but it's family friendly. We usually pick a place that is kid neutral, that has a playground. So we try to welcome everyone in the community that can come. Next is checking out the Body Positive website for more resources, the Health at Every Size website. If you're interested in joyful movement, there is a great speaker. She has videos. She has an online presence called Fat Kids Dance Party, where she has diverse bodies who are doing exercises that meet different criteria, right? And so she even has one that's in a chair. So it's an hour, it's a 45-minute long workout, and it's in a chair, and there's lots of different bodies doing those exercises or those movements. And of course, also, I didn't add it on here. Yes, I did. The She's All Fat podcast, if you're interested in specifically body positivity in relation to weight. They also do other intersectional things, but the She's All Fat podcast is also, it's one that is free. It's on Apple Podcasts. I highly recommend it. It's a great episode. Yes, Leslie.
And Lyndall, along those lines, Lyndall, would you you like to mention real quick your Journey to Wellness program you're putting together?
Oh, cool.
Yes, I'm starting a called Wellness Journey. It's going to meet the third Wednesday night of the month from 5:30 to 6:30. And we're going to be looking at different aspects of wellness. And my first one will meet February 19th this month.
Awesome.
And it will be on diet and using substitutions for various foods and cooking and stuff.
Like diet, like gluten-free and vegan and that sort of thing. Dairy-free, all that sort of stuff.
So
So
we're
how
going
did
to
they,
be
did you say?
I love that.
looking at different areas, different meetings, and so
That is
it's
awesome.
trying to get started on, so it kind of parallels some of yours.
Is that here?
Um,
Is it here?
Pardon? Yeah.
Want me to go get some flyers? Do you have some flyers for that?
Yeah, but it's more fun.
Let me go grab some.
There's some
Awesome.
reference to this.
Yes, thank you for getting those flyers, Leslie. That sounds like a really great group and thank you for mentioning that. What a great resource.
Maybe you'd like to come and visit us sometime.
I would love to come visit. I'm going to grab a flyer on the way out for
Okay.
sure. So thank you for including that. And last but not least, discussion. I know we're at the 1 o'clock mark, but are there any questions that you have just about this discussion in general, for me, any questions or comments before we wrap up today?
I have to go because I have to be on the next.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any questions, any points of discussion?
So if someone came to you and said, is there any place that I could go and learn more about nutrition?
Yeah.
Or what food, do you have references?
I do. There is actually a great body positive nutritionist. If you are interested, in fact, I actually have some of her cards in my bag. Actually, hold on just a second. I'm so glad you mentioned that. I'll leave some of her stuff out here for you. Her name is Larissa Larson. She's a registered nutritionist, and she works from a body positive lens. So yes, I would definitely recommend, as well as there are also community events like that wellness program. That might be another great place to start. Because I really do want to make that distinction that body positivity is not about not making life choices that are good for you, right? That's not what this is about. This is about loving yourself and breaking out of the cycle of shame, because shame doesn't work, right? And so if you're interested in losing weight for health reasons, or that is something, or you're interested in working with a dietitian or a nutritionist, there are more and more nutritionists that are working from this perspective. So I do have those cards if you're interested. That's a great question. Any other questions?
On that health and exercise,
Yeah.
do you have somebody that could recommend like exercise or such for people that have problems?
Yeah, I would go on the website. They actually have some people that you can talk to. Like, I think they have a resource line. So if you're looking for, like, for example, specific exercises that are, will meet you where you are if you have back issues or chronic pain or something like that, that might be a great resource just to start looking on the website. There's lots of movement resources and ideas. So I don't know of anybody local, but I would start with that website. Yeah, for sure. Any other questions? Yes, Leslie?
Yeah, the thing about the BMI and the shame, I was thinking about, I don't know that they still do this, but they did it when my kids were in school here, and I bet they do,
I think they still do.
is that they have every kid line up for the BMI, and they make a great big to-do about it, and they
Yeah.
send letters home to the parents, and it is just,
Yeah.
I make sure my kids saw me throw those envelopes out unopened. I said, "You're fine."
It's ridiculous.
Mhm.
It's terrible
But-
for the kids.
Yeah, but they make it such a production out of it.
Yeah.
I definitely feel like, and they do it in front of all their classmates
Yes.
too, and I feel like shame is such a part of that, and I hate to say this, but I feel like that's almost encouraged.
It's abusive.
Yes.
It's abusive
It's
psychologically, yeah. And again, I mean, even if you have a child that is, you know, their pediatrician is telling you, you know, your child is overweight,
Yeah.
right? If that is a conversation, shaming your child and, you know, making them feel that all the time, that is so damaging for the long term.
There is not one fat kid out there who doesn't know they're fat.
Yeah, that is very true. Well, and that's the other thing too is, you know, this is one of my pet peeves as a therapist and also just as a human being is when we try to use really simple solutions for things. Like, for example, we tell a fat person, right, like, oh, have you ever considered this diet? It's like, no, I've never considered dieting. That thought has never crossed my mind. You know, it's like, yeah, they probably tried every diet under the sun. You know, it's interesting that I have a friend that joked and she said, I was pretty much like, I could have been like a licensed nutritionist by the age of like my 4th grade because of all the diets that I have been put on to try to curb this. And it's like, the kids, like, they know that they know they're fat, right? They don't need a letter telling them that they're fat, right? What they need is to feel like a normal kid. And let's talk about, let's introducing joyful movement. Why not be introducing them to different foods and letting them experience life, right? And if they grow up and they're fat, then why can't we just love them for that? You know, it's like we're always trying to change our kids. And I also think that there's been a big national movement on that too. And, you know, they've claimed it the obesity epidemic. And I think that that's an interesting conversation to have. But I think it's interesting when we start talking about conversations about weight, especially about weight loss, how can we do this in a way that's body positive, right?
Arkansas is one of the highest states for child obesity.
Mm-hmm.
It is the highest state for children who are not getting enough to eat, not enough adequate nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the same kids.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that you bring up a great point that oftentimes when we really look at the diet, right, in terms of whole foods, the diet with kids who are deemed obese, there's malnutrition on that end as well, right? We're not getting enough whole foods. So changing the discussion away from being fat to what type of nutritious foods can we implement and giving resources, that seems to be like probably a more effective form, right? Rather than just sending letters home. Like, whoopee, you're telling me my kid's fat, I see him every day. Right? It's like, okay. But let's talk about what parents really probably need to support. They probably need more nutrition support, right? Learning how to cook foods in ways that their kid will eat. Finding those types of resources, I think, will create way more of an impact than some of the other tactics that we've seen in the state. So this is a great discussion. Any other comments, dialogue, questions? We could definitely talk for a really long time about this subject, but yeah.
You were talking about doctors.
Uh-huh.
I went to a doctor because my arm was hurting. He looked at me and said, "You're obese."
Oh,
That's all he said.
that's the worst.
Turns out I had tendonitis and I had to have my arm operated on.
Yeah, that's like the picture. I'm impaled,
Yeah, I
right?
never went back to that doctor.
No, yeah. It's shaming and also inadequate care.
Now,
Right.
what's obesity got to do with sore arm?
Right. Yeah.
You know, you've got a lot of businesses now that, especially when you're in Arkansas, where the employees go in and once a year have to be weighed, and their insurance go up if you're over a certain weight. They look at a few other things, but your insurance goes up.
Is that legal?
And we're on that plan. Yeah. And they come every October, and you got to weigh,
Yeah,
check
but
your blood
I don't think-
pressure, and your insurance will go up
Wow.
if they compare it from last year's, you know.
Oh, that can't be legal.
Sounds isn't part of that,
But they think that they're helping you,
you know,
you know.
Yeah, there are no laws in terms of discrimination based on
That doesn't come under pre-existing conditions or anything? Ah,
No. Yeah. It's definitely, like, there are so many laws right now that make it okay to ostracize fat people.
so if you have
right?
cancer and you're losing weight, your insurance rates go down?
Yes.
Yeah, they just look at a few things.
Oh,
Yeah. They also do that for life insurance too. They will, if you're over a certain amount on the BMI, then they can deny you for life insurance. Which we know that the BMI is an inaccurate tool, right? So there's a lot of areas such as insurance, life insurance, where there's a lot of discrimination, and it's legal to do that.
So for months, before October comes, you're like starving yourself before you go in and get weighed, you know? Yeah.
Which is damaging to your metabolism, right? To do that. Crash diets are not good for you. So I think that it definitely brings into a larger conversation on a macro scale, what are some of these policies in place that are affecting us too, right? I think great, and thank you for that dialogue. Anybody else want to speak before we wrap up today? Okay, well, thank you for being a good audience. Yes, Kristen.
Did you mention the group meeting?
I did mention the club meetings, yes, every third Friday of the month. So please come, we're very inclusive. You can bring your kids, your grandkids, yourself. We just have a nice time, it's a nice discussion. So I encourage you all to come. So, and it's from 6 to 8, for us to put the time, 6 to 8 on that meeting. It typically varies. I usually send out a public Facebook invite, and I'm going to start making a page for it too. Okay, well then we can maybe do flyers in the library too.
that'd be great.
Yeah, we'll do
Absolutely.
flyers in the library, for sure. One thing that we've kind of varied on location based on weather. We were doing it where it was close by an outdoor play area, but with it being so cold, we moved it to McDonald's because they have the best play area for kids. So, it kind of varies based on that. But yes, thank you, Kristen. Okay, well, enjoy your afternoon. Thank you for your time. It was a lot of fun, and